Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mac Admins podcast. Oh, no, wrong script. So, hi, everybody. I'm Tom Bridge. I'm a partner at Technoloutionary LLC in Washington, D.C. We're an Apple Consultants Network member, and we serve small to medium businesses. Our general target market's around 10 users to 200 users. So, in a lot of our cases, we come from a very tiny IT department, and a lot of environments aren't used to IT controls. And so we try to bring them a little bit forward and protect them a little bit from themselves. And now we're 5 to 6 years into Munki at this point, deploying it as a platform, as a community. Thanks to the hard work of many coders. I see Greg's up there. Thank you, Greg. I don't say thank you enough, so thank you. It's a mature platform that is managing probably 1 million Macs at this point, give or take, maybe more than 1 million. And it's a very stable piece of work. And for that, we have a lot to thank our contributors to the project. If you've ever committed code to the Munki project, please raise your hand. I see it. Many people, so thank you very much on behalf of a grateful community. Munki manages about 500 of our Macs across our client base. That's about 90% of our fleet. We started using Munki for deployment primarily back in 2013 at one client. Since then, we've done more than 30 Munki installs for groups as small as a single user or as large as around 150. And to do this, we built a tool called Munki in a Box, and we released it to the public probably about 18 months ago at this point. It's been through multiple revisions. Version 1.5.1 came out last week. And every Munki install that we've done, at least in the last year or so, has largely been a product of Munki in a Box. That doesn't mean that they were always done right the first time. And some of the choices that we've made have influenced choices overall that have been made as part of Munki in a Box. For example, last week we released a new version that makes overrides the default recipes for part of the process and uses those by default in auto package. Because again, we want to deploy an environment and we want to make sure that it's sensible and that it is something that will scale over time. And using auto package overrides from the get-go seems like it's going to save us a lot of trouble down the road, especially now that trust settings are in play and things like that are part of our environment. And so you can pick up the project there. It's freely downloadable. It's just a bash script, and it's meant to operate in a OS 10 server kind of in mindset. At least that will get you up off the ground and exploring the world that Munki has to offer. So if you've been noticing a theme that has recurred throughout yesterday's presentations and today's presentations, it's that change management matters. And it's you got to think carefully about your fleet-wide decisions, and that's an IT department challenge that everybody has, whether they want it or not. And you can go YOLO life and just test your code in production, but that doesn't always have the best results. Do you want to touch every machine in your fleet? Not without a real good reason. And this is why you test. And if you've got a test machine and you make a mistake, the fixes are trivial at best. You wipe out the machine, you reload your config from state, and suddenly you're back in business. But if you apply a file like this, a configuration file that breaks your server's interaction with the Munki clients, for example, if you change all of your endpoints to suddenly if you typo your domain name for the Munki software repo URL, or things along those lines, suddenly you have a whole really bad experience. Once upon a time, before I learned this lesson, we had a client with about 40 machines in a centralized Munki server, and I thought I was being clever, and I pushed a payload-free package using Munki to update a few of their settings. Hilarity ensued. The machine stopped checking into the locally created Munki server, and it necessitated a round-robin visit to every machine in their environment, which took hours of time that we couldn't bill for. As a small consultancy, that was quite frustrating. That's when I got really serious about careful setup of Munki environments and about change management for those environments as a whole. So, no, I'm not suggesting that you use Profile Manager as your primary MDM. That would be silly. But I will say it's the reference implementation for the MDM specification as a whole. And so to be familiar with Profile Manager and with profiles as a concept, I would strongly recommend that you actually spend some time with Profile Manager, because if there's a feature out there, if there's a checkbox that exists in the MDM client world, it exists here first. And so understanding how that can affect your environment and understanding how that deploys out to your environment as a whole is really, really important. Revisions to individual preferences are much more straightforward to rectify in the future if you're changing your software deployment scheme outside of the software deployment scheme. If you abstract that layer, you are preventing yourself from abandoning your fleet out in the wild. Out-of-band management really matters. And so if you're updating Munki's management settings via Munki and you make the mistake, you're out of luck. Now you have a system that won't update anything. That's bad. So if you do have to script that entire environment, make sure the script fails safely, returns itself back to prior settings. And then if the change is successful, that you have some notification method for that change. We'll talk a little bit more about a good way to handle that in a little bit in perhaps one of our cases. So there are some best bets out there for change management out in the community. Some of them are free or at least inexpensive, but still require infrastructure. The two examples that I have listed up on the screen here are Puppet and Chef. If you have been in sessions in this conference, you have probably heard about Puppet and Chef. Everybody raise your hand, heard about Puppet and Chef? Yay! Again, you get confirmation of your settings changes, and you get fixability, because again, you're managing outside of band. And if you do have, I'm sorry, I realized that I copied through some of my notes twice. So it's important to test early and test often. And if you're not testing with virtual machines, now's a really good time to start. And deploying your tests out on individual VMs before they actually end up in production is really important for the stability of your environment at large. And that's whether you're managing 1 Mac or 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000. Test before you deploy. Testing is how you make sure it's not going to massively fail in ways that you were able to predict ahead of deployment, because no fix survives content with the jankiest client. And so you're going to have fixes that need to be deployed to clients that have undergone some peculiar experience as part of their upgrade process. But having at least the standard use cases taken care of before you get to that point is really, really important. And you can do that in virtual machines. Set up a Mac Mini with ESXi, and suddenly you have VMs from 10.10 to 10.12, 10.9 if you really want, 10.8 if you want, 10.6.8 server if you are still one of those unfortunate souls, like me, who has to support one of those. Don't just limit your testing to those virtual machines, though. You're probably going to want to try out some of your tests on the hardware that matches the majority of your fleet, not just that which lives in a virtualization machine. And some of that is just down to how are you sure that, you can obviously reset the serial number on a VM in VMware to match the standard Apple configuration of a serial number. But by the default out of the box, it will not. And so if you're testing DEP rollouts and things like that, it may make sense for you to actually have a spare machine that you can test from. This is something that is incredibly valuable for your organization, because you want to be able to support your fleet on a machine that looks like your fleet. And it's hard sometimes, and you may not get that luxury if there's not budget for that. But if you don't test it at all, you can't protect your people. So you have a balancing act to hold up. One of the other important things that you can do in your environment to help protect yourself from mistakes are things like source control. And for example, as a project does drag on, and I will admit that this is true in my code, especially for Munki in a box, some of those commit messages might read fixed documentation instead of altered README file to reflect new features in feature set. So commit messages are like messages to your future self that said, this is what I did and why I did it and where I did it. And you can use a private repo on GitHub for your Munki repository if you really want to, or you can set up a private Git server for this kind of stuff. But putting your Munki repo into source control is an option that you have, especially as your fleet grows larger, to reduce the amount of possible damage to your entire environment. And there are multiple people who have articles up on how to actually put your entire repo into source control using Git, Git LFS, get fat, things along those lines. And in the show notes, in the presenter's notes for this particular presentation, which you can find on my blog at cannonball.tombridge.com, there are links to Graham Pugh's post on this subject, an actual introduction article from the Munki wiki on using the Munki environment with a repository with a Git server, as well as 2 articles by Alistair Banks on introduction to Git Fat for Munki and how to actually set up your repository and migrate your data into it, which is the really important part. You don't just want to set it up from scratch. You actually want to take forward your manifests and your catalogs. Well, not your catalogs, you'll remake those in the process. But your manifests and your individual client identifiers. And moving to source control for your Munki repository in your environment as a whole, it's going to put a lot of strictures on the way in which you make changes to your environment. But moving away from kind of the YOLO life of editing everything in Munki admin and just firing it off, moving away from that theme is generally something that we're seeing a lot more of, and actually spending time building good protections into your entire workflow is really, really, really helpful. As a consultant, we spend a lot of time addressing problems and doing the day-to-day scut work of IT. A lot of our clients are small, and a lot of them don't have a lot of resources. Source control can be a challenge to implement well in those particular cases. And you do have your work cut out for you. It will save your bacon, and when it does, it's saving your company's IT infrastructure, your bottom line, and it's protecting your users and giving you a better reputation in the process. And now for my parade of mistakes. These are all mistakes that we made in our environments. We're going to talk about specific errors that we made along the way, and I really want to be clear about something about all of this. We all make mistakes. You can still come to conferences like this one and present, even when you have done something that was so stupid that you can make fun of yourself on stage for having done it. And there are a lot of things that we have done that are errors of commission as well as errors of omission, because those are the 2 classes of major mistakes that we make. You either don't do something that would have protected your entire environment, and then you accidentally wiped out your entire manifest list, or you can have an error of omission, which is the first one that we'll talk about. We didn't do something. And so I feel like both of those errors are fairly common in our environments, and it's important to talk about both of them. And it's important to have good after-action reports where you actually talk about the problem that you solved, and why you solved it, and why it's important not to repeat that particular mistake in the future. Yep, we did that. HTTP only. No SSL, no TLS involved in the entire repository. How many of you know Sam Keeley? Sam Keeley showed me something that was delightful in 2014 at ACTEC, and essentially set up a proxy server on the conference Wi-Fi, was sniffing around for anybody who was checking for Munki URLs, and at that point, man in the middle of your traffic, because he was broadcasting a Wi-Fi network with the exact same credentials as everything else, and said, and now I have root on all of your computers. Scary, right? No TLS, man in the middle is a perfectly viable option. Do not do this to your machines that leave your network. So why did we do this? Why would you do this? We had a hardwired network on lab computers, and we were just getting started, and we didn't want to charge for the cert, and we didn't want to go through the process of making sure the cert didn't expire, or that other things could have been set up. With an ounce of prevention, we could have saved ourselves a pound of cure. But in this particular case, this was a fairly easy thing for us to fix. And it is, I put medium to high, but it's really on the high side of things that you should really fix in a right quick hurry. The general fixes for this are get a commercial cert or a CA signed cert, something that resolves back to a trusted root on the individual workstation machines. Trust the certificate if you have to. It should largely just resolve to one of the CAs that you're already signing against or reading against. And then change the endpoint to use the certificate. So why did we do this? Well, it was simple at the time. We had a lab full of 25 Macs. They were never leaving the network because they were bolted to the desk. And the server was bolted to the desk. And it was on a network segment that was abstracted from everything else. Why would we ever need to do that? Well, they liked Munki so much, they wanted to double the size of the lab. And that was fine until they changed their budget around to be like, we wanted this to be a mobile lab. We wanted this to be able to go from place to place and take it to other locations and use other Wi-Fi networks that were maybe off property. And suddenly our solution was a really bad idea because there was now something that could easily be co-opted or corrupted and the machines owned and our lives forfeit or something like that. And so it was fairly straightforward to handle this problem. But what are the other kind of circumstances in which you could do this? Early runs of Munki in a Box just said, HTTP's fine. We're just trying to get off the ground. You can customize this process and get it out into the wild. Not our finest hour. So there are some things here that you have to do if your repository either faces the internet or can resolve on the internet, or even is just being checked elsewhere and outside. You have to use HTTP basic auth or client certificates to protect your repository. And again, it's all about the complexities that are involved in these particular cases. HTTP basic auth is good enough because at that point, other people can't get to your repository and steal its innards for fun and profit. And because, I mean, we all deploy commercially licensed software out on our fleets, or at least I'm sure most of us do on some level. But you want to make sure that you're abiding by your EULA agreement, which isn't that you're going to redistribute it to anybody for fun and profit, or fun. And so, from our perspective, these are two very, very simple things that you can do that don't cost you any money and they don't cost you any time. Because you can get a self-signed certificate that you then trust on your individual workstation as part of your enrollment workflow and say, yep, that's a trusted cert, that cert's good for 5 years, or anything along those lines. Obviously that's not a great experience for your users. You'll probably want to make sure that that's a cert that resolves back to public trust that you can then take care of. But again, an identity SSL certificate, $15 a year, if that. You can probably get it cheaper from Namecheap or some of the other repos out there. I recommend getting a real cert for your box. One of the other mistakes that we've made over time was the single manifest model. Who here knows about site default? If you have a manifest called site default on your Munki server and you don't set anything else other than the repo URL, then poof, I get site default when I log in because I haven't specified a client identifier and I want something installed. But as it's happened over time, this was another lab kind of environment. And so what we said was, look, you only have one kind of computer on your network. And again, it began as a lab build out and expanded elsewhere into the environment. They loved how all of their machines just got updated all the time. And so they said, well, can we do this for everything for our teacher fleet as well? So there are some important things to recognize about Munki's default behavior. And again, if you're using site default from the get-go, there are 3 other things that you can build manifests against that you don't need to touch your client for. And those are, in order of precedence from first to last, are the fully qualified domain name of the machine, the short host name of the machine, or the serial number of the Mac that's checking in. And so, in those particular cases, so I mean, here we've got a good example. If my host name for my machine always resolves back to tbridge.techvolutionary.com, or my short domain name is always tbridge, or my serial number starts with C02 and ends in some other string, my machine will go and get those manifests first. So there are a couple of people who have written really good guides to how to build out manifests for your environment. And I wanted to throw those up here. Victor Vranchin, his post is first, and it's an opinionated admin's guide to the manifests, to creating manifests, and it's quite good. And there are a lot of solutions that he proposes in there that make a lot of sense for environments, generally speaking. Alan Su responded to that and expounded from that. And so the 2 of these are very, very helpful, taken in combination. And so, as you go through the process, you don't need to change your client because your client's expected behavior is taken care of at that point. If you probably haven't specified the site default manifest by default, you just said, leave it blank, I'll get the site default, everything will be fine. So if you then create either short host name, FQDN, or serial number based manifests, it's a fairly straightforward process. You build a copy of a manifest that you think is good for your base fleet, and then at that point, script the hell out of what happens next. And you can build you should, at least on some level, have an understanding of the inventory of your system for your fleet. And so you've got to know what those serial numbers are anyway, if only for insurance purposes or warranty check purposes. There are a number of different reasons you should know about every machine in your fleet. And you can build individual manifests from that. Whether or not you're already on the garden path away from site default, as well as using maybe Munki webadmin for managing these kind of manifests as a whole, you get a clear and sane way. There's a clear and sane way forward. You can stack manifests. You can add, say, in the included manifests array that is built into every manifest, or can be built into every manifest, gives you all kinds of stacking options. So that you can say site default, which is the browsers, and a couple of different, internal only programs and things like that might give you a good solid site default. And then Creative Group, they get their own copy of Creative Cloud from your system. Office, people who need Office can get Office from that separate included manifest. And you get flexible structures to build from. One of our other mistakes was single catalog. Yeah, this is the one that makes me hang my head most in shame out of anything else, was that essentially we created a testing, we had a testing catalog, and we were testing it out for 5 users, and suddenly they hired 45 more people. And we just kept going, because we were working stem and stern just to get everything out the door. And we only had the testing catalog. It took one C-levels machine, affected by a Firefox bug in one of their point releases that we were getting from auto package every 2 hours, that we changed that around. And so really you want testing and production catalogs. You might even want development testing and production catalogs as part of this process. And you're going to want testers. So all this stuff is pretty safe, right? We've reached a point where every release is perfectly good and without bugs. I'm sure everyone who's ever deployed Adobe software knows that it all works perfectly the first time, and that there are never any bugs.
Everything's fine.
Everything's fine. Nothing to see here. How are you? Living the YOLO life in this case might be easy to deploy. It is not easy to recover the trust of your users from. And so it might have gotten you to the pub 5 minutes faster on a deployment day. But you're never going to get that user's trust back when you overwrote their working piece of software with something that purported to be the same. So I think that this is the biggest part of your process. You have to find good testers. And it can never be just one person. It can't just be you. It should never be someone whose application scope is limited. You never want to test the people who just get site default. You always, or just a basic catalog of, does the browser open? Is that enough? And it shouldn't just be IT department testers. You should have users in the field. I have a couple of users who I love dearly for their ability to find the edge case in any piece of software. Who can find, hey, we got this pivot table in Excel that doesn't work quite right at 15.30.blah. And it's important to get out of your IT bubble a little bit to find good users to test with. And it can never be someone whose work is indispensable. You get to help your clients or your organization decide who's indispensable, but not having testers isn't a good option either. So you're going to need somebody to help you through this process from your fleet. The other thing that you're going to want to do is make good tests. Charles and I were joking on the podcast recently that, hey, the application launched, that means it works. Maybe it can't be that simplistic. If we were in education, what we do is create a rubric for evaluating updates. And we'd have a set of test results that would match what our users' experience should be for a given environment. So pick some critical tests for your primary applications that they must pass. and evaluate them against those must-pass environments. You can't sign into Okta, well, sometimes it's not Okta's fault. And I was going to say, if you have a browser, you've got to make sure that it can load organization critical websites. So Okta, timesheets, help desk, the Washington Post, ESPN.com, something with Flash in it if you're permitting Flash in your organization. For the Office suite, you have to pick a clear set of documents that your organization uses and updates often. And make a copy of that document, test updates to those documents, save them, distribute them to another workstation, and make sure they still open in the old version. Because the backward compatibility in variegated fleets who may or may not check in on an hourly basis or may not have access outside their organization is really, really helpful. Print something from those environments, because print workflows still matter. We still work with creative and design teams all the time where we get the latest copy of an Adobe application and it, just heads out. Work with the designer for your Creative Cloud workflows so that you have workflows to test that are deeply technical and specialized to the creative environment. Cover that printing process. Again, cover third-party tools and other things like that. Because if you don't, Shirley will find you and end you. Now, Shirley is delightful. She is one of my favorite people at one of my favorite clients. And she was actually our Sierra tester this year. And so as part of that process, we backed up her entire machine with her watching so that she could revert back to that backup at any time. And then we deployed not only Sierra, but Creative Cloud 2017 and sent her loose into the wild. And we hung out with her all day, just looking for things that were broken. Now, I asked Shirley to make the mean face, but Shirley is usually a smiling, happy user. But she has no tolerance for software that doesn't work right. And neither should you. So don't jump to the latest release for your entire fleet without finding a Shirley in your environment and testing with her. It's really important, and it's important for your department's trust value within your organization to get past that. So, this takes us to another moment that was not our proudest hour, about improper DNS and switching servers. These were two that kind of combined into a troublesome situation. And it's a bit like the monkey bars on a playground. You'd swing from one ring to another, trusting that you have enough momentum to reach the next ring, or you'd fall into the tan bark at the bottom. Now, the California tan bark that I grew up with was brutal. Sharp corners, itchy if it got under your shirt, but I suppose it was better than falling on asphalt. So, at least it had something going for you there. The crazy things they let you do as kids. All of this serves to say you don't want to have your users fall down into the tan bark as you shift between server environments. I've done that wrong, and it was a huge pain because we had to touch, again, every machine in our fleet. And I'm primarily here to provide you with some good guidelines for how to prepare yourself for this kind of move. Use a per service, fully qualified domain name for this particular service. If you're not using pure service, fully FQDNs everywhere for all of your services, now's a really good time to start. We set up a Munki repository on server.companyname.com. And so at this point, it was their server. It was their only server for their entire environment. Open Directory Master, File Share, Profile Manager, Munki Server. And so we just deployed out, when we deployed out to the workstations, defaults right, software repo, or, /library/preferences/managed installs, software repo URL, HTTPS, server.domainname.com/monkey_repo. Which was great, because there was only one server. We didn't set up multiple names. Again, stupid. And so we finally had permission to start migrating away from that old server name. But we couldn't take the server name that we had chosen for our software repo URL with us, because the wiki server that was part of OS 10, 10.6.8, which they had heavily customized, wasn't going anywhere. That thing was on life support. I do regular chicken sacrifices to keep it alive and functional. It's kind of the scariest thing that we have to do for this particular client, because they're still 6 months away from migrating all of their data off of it. But we couldn't take we had to change the Munki software repo URL. And we didn't want to do this through a scripting or through a payload-free package, even though we know that's a decent way to do it, because you start to get to the point where you're in the air and you're sighting up for that landing, and it might be 35 times out of 40, you're going to stick that landing and it's going to be great. What happens the other 5 times? Well, there's usually an ambulance involved, and sometimes there's fire. And for some of our individual machines that aren't managed by configuration management in this particular cases, we hit trouble. And so we wanted to make sure that we had something that was repeatable, that was idempotent, that wouldn't corrupt a bad value to corrupt a good value to a bad one. And so we thought about going through that change process and creating an email at the end. And just would email the support address and says, okay, I made it. I stuck the landing. We're good. I'm checking in on the new server. And then we decided that we really hated email, and that email was lousy. It was a lousy way to go through these kind of things. Because it is, and email is what it is. But it's not the greatest thing for kind of tracking these kinds of things. We thought about leaving a file or a log entry in the log just to make sure that we could check for that and make sure that everything was okay. That wasn't so slick either. So what about Slack? Because the organization was heavy into Slack use. And so they had 40 channels for their bunch of different projects. We had some IT-related channels that we were dealing with. And so we wrote this. Change Munki, tell Slack. And all it does, at least in this early version, is default's right, pref to check, should be. And so essentially, at that point, we're checking for an individual preference key that we want to change to a good value. And if it's right, we don't touch it. It just exits the script. Thanks for playing. Have a nice day. It's been fun knowing you. But if it doesn't match, it steps through the process of actually changing that, and then on completion of that process immediately, that says, hey, by the way, this is a client update from ident, which is the client identifier from the system. I've updated pref to check to should be successfully. And then you get a message that looks a lot like that. And so we also, in addition to this, because you never want to limit it to a single setting on a single run, you might want to change change Munki and tell Slack many things and build an array of settings that will get you out there. These are in public gists. They're linked from the blog post that is contained therein on the blog post. So how do we make sure that this works? Well, we've done a fair amount of testing on this. I haven't come up with a way that totally breaks it. Your environment may be different. And if it does, please let me know so that we can update the script to take care of any edge case that we missed. Because really what it comes down to, and all of the mistakes that I have made so far, the best method for fixing them involves making verifiable changes. And this is all very, very simple to fix if you have configuration management outside of your existing state management, your software deployment. Because if you've got that, you push a profile update, poof, you've got a new Munki server. And you've got a log of that entire process through every step of the MDM client routine. Because you can do that and deploy preferences out there. Because, again, even though it's custom MCX at this point, you can update custom MCX using individual profiles along these lines. So really, you need a config manager whether you think you do or you don't. And we're getting to the point, if you saw Charles's panel yesterday, he's saying MDM only by 2020. I think that might be the right timeline. We're never going to know until we get to the final result. So these scripts and these hoops that we all jump through, that entire script that I had to write to get our client from one service to another, would have been way simpler if we just implemented configuration management changes quite some time. And so if you take away one thing from my mistakes, it's not just that you shouldn't make them, but you should make them in ways that you can fix them more easily than these extra hoops you've had to jump through. And configuration management is, again, out-of-band management for your other tools. That matters. So there's no real reason that you couldn't go touch a fleet of 10 or a fleet of 50 or a fleet of 100 if you had to. If you have a fleet of 10,000, a fleet of 100,000, things get a lot worse. Then you're talking about training interns and handing out USB flash sticks. And I just have nightmares thinking about that whole situation. So better busy than bored, but be busy on the right thing. So to sum up, change management matters. And if you don't have change management, write scripts, use service-based DNS everywhere. And what I mean by service DNS is that even if it's based on the same server as 5 other tasks, they should all go to 5 different DNS endpoints. Munki.domain.com or changemanagement.domain.com, softwareupdate.domain.com, and everything like that, because you should never be in the situation where you're tied back to an individual box's name, even if that name is really cool. Because, I mean, we've all named servers cool things at various points, and kind of like thinking that Thor's taking care of my DNS. But really, what you want to do is you want to have service-based records that exist out there. You can alias them out, you can make CNAMEs that are much more clever, but I think this is the biggest take back. And then never leave without a plan. Never get out to that point where you're just running around with your hair on fire, where you're not sitting down to think about what the results of your actions will be. Otherwise, you're going to end up in that situation where you have to touch every machine. That's a really bad day. You don't want to have that day. I've had that day. I would really not like to have that day ever again. And to the best of your ability, use Munki's features as much as you can. Nested manifests, individual manifests that key off of a serial number or an FQDN or a short DNS name. Use those features to your advantage. They're going to lessen your workload. So that's just about it. So we've got a couple of minutes. I think we've got about 5 minutes for Q&A. So if folks have questions, I see one up front. We've got a mic, so right down front. Just hand it over.
Hello. Yeah, here you go. I'm about to start doing a Munki build.
Okay.
At our university, we're currently using Jamf. I'm going to start using Munki for students-owned devices for the software center side of things. What platform do you recommend building it on? Because I was thinking about putting it on Ubuntu, but
Great.
I noticed on your Brooklyn.evolutionary one, it's running on a Mac OS server.
It is running on a Mac OS server because that's what I have in my test lab. And again, we're a small consultancy. I don't have a server farm. I don't also publicly link our AWS store or our AWS repository that has all of these things. Brooklyn.techevolutionary.com is my home Mac server. It's also where we do some of our Mac testing, because we do have servers out there that are running on the Mac OS platform. It doesn't need to be. Again, all Munki needs to have on the server side is a web service. Everything else is client-based. And so do what's easiest for your environment. If you are going to open it up to the public, you may want to take some steps to protect it. And obviously, HTTP basic auth and client certificates are a good way to do that. Setting that up at AWS, you can also do some other things to make sure that that's read-only to the right people and not to the wrong people. I strongly recommend, if you're going to look at that, look at the AWS middleware that exists for Munki. It does not matter. You can set it up on IIS if that's what your organization has for their internal web services. You can set it up on Ubuntu, Apache, Nginx. Those are all available and good, perfectly usable options for your Munki server. So again, most of our client servers that we have on-prem at various clients are between 10 and 50 individual users. And so then we use whatever infrastructure we're provided with. Sometimes that's a Mac OS server. Sometimes that is an Ubuntu server. Sometimes that's AWS. So,
Thank you.
Other questions?
Anybody else?
Did I screw anything up? I mean, other than what I already talked about? Great.
No, it looks like we're done. No hands.
Cool. I think I scared him straight.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Tom.